Welcome to Subramani. I normally talk only about wealth and investing, but I realize that many people of today's generation also borrow a lot of money, and if you do not borrow responsibly, chances are you will never get into the wealth creation stage. So why do we say that borrowing is an act of responsibility? So if the husband and wife, a young couple, let's say, are borrowing money, it becomes a joint responsibility to repay the money. When you borrowing is very easy, right? All you do is call up somebody, or somebody anyway is chasing you. So you go and borrow, but and that to this generation, which is very different from in the earlier generation. Maybe 80 years ago and 90 years ago, many of these loans were not even available. So sometime only in the 1970s were home loans available, and that too it took a long time for home loans, for the home loan giving company to ask you to take money. Earlier you went to them and said, I need to buy a house, can you give me 50,000, can you give me 1 lakh? That used to be the ticket size. Today people are willing to borrow, whether it is to buy a white good, whether it is to buy themselves a vacation, or for a marriage. Of course, car loans and home loans, I think 70-80% of the cars bought by individuals are bought through car loans, right? So that is the market has definitely grown. So there is a lot of loan taking and repaying that's happening. Of course, most loans get repaid, some don't get repaid for various reasons. One of the reasons for which people borrow is also the uninsured medical expenses. What do you do? Family is hit by COVID. You have no cash other than the ones which you have locked in. Let's say you have a long insurance policy or things like that, and you can't get cash out of it. You have no choice but to borrow money, right? So this kind of money people have borrowed, and the problem arose during the COVID times, when people were stuck without much of cash flow, because either pay cuts were given to people, or some people were there were just not enough jobs available, especially in the unorganized sector. Carpenters, masons, painters, right? All those people suffered the maximum. So the government came out with something called a moratorium. They said, okay, you need not pay for 3 months or 4 months, whatever. Give a small period of window where the loan was paused. When the loan was paused, you still had to pay interest, right? So somebody had to bear the interest. So imagine telling a bank that you cannot charge interest. I mean, the bank has to pay interest to its depositor. So there was no question of increasing the burden already on the people. So there was no question, but the installment was stopped, not the interest. So even during that period of 3 months or 4 months that this was stopped, you had to pay interest. So the amount of money that you had to repay had to obviously go up, right? Also, non-repayment would mean social stigma. It meant you can't borrow more money from somebody else, and also it meant a poor credit rating score, your CIBIL score, or any of there are 3-4 companies which give you a score. Your rating would go down, right? So that was also scary. So a waiver meant during this period you got a installment holiday. You didn't have to repay. You would not get those pesky calls asking for repayment, and it did not impact your credit rating. So this way it helped everybody. But during the period, the interest was being accrued. So at the end of it, I'll show you a numerical example, is that the interest was getting added to the loan and the repayment amount was increasing. This was very, very rare, one of those unforeseen mishaps, and the loan moratorium was a measure to help individuals who could not repay. But however, if you could repay, it still made sense for you to repay, because this was not coming free, right? So I'll just The rationale behind giving the loan moratorium was obviously to lessen the burden on the borrowers. However, like I said, it is not a surrender but just a pause on your existing EMI for just those few months, right? So it was not something permanently available. You, for a few months, 3 months, 4 months, that small vacation was available. It allowed you to postpone paying the EMI for a few months, and it was more like a life jacket to save you from drowning till you reach the shore. The moratorium was agreed upon by the lender, and the lender knew the advantages. The lender knew that next 3 months you would not pay the loan, you would not make the loan repayment. You knew that you could postpone this payment, so there was no panic on either side, and the borrower was not pestered for repayment. However, it had disadvantages. The interest for this period would still be borne by the borrower, which was fair because you could not ask the bank to bear it, or the depositor in the bank to say, okay, you will not get any interest for this period. So that did not happen. So you got time, not an interest waiver for the period. And suddenly at the end of the moratorium period, you have to pay a bigger amount for a longer period. As the interest accrued will increase the total cost, the existing borrowers capable of paying their loans were always advised when people ask me what to do, and I would say, if you can repay the loan, you should repay the loan. Ultimately, you borrowed money on interest, so it always made sense to repay. However, for some reason, you had to pay a bigger hospital bill, or your income took a hit, or you and your spouse were working and your spouse lost her job, which meant there was a greater burden on your cash flows, then under such difficult circumstances, it made sense to postpone your payment. For example, for a person with say a 28 lakh rupee loan, or the 28.86 lakhs loan post moratorium, it would have become 32 lakhs, right? The customer's penal, bounce charges, everything altogether increased it, and the EMI increased by 2,773 per month, right? However, there was one important clause that if you paid the money during this moratorium period, it was being set off against your principal, which was good because there was an interest waiver. The amount was being credited to your account, and therefore you would have paid lesser. EMI later on, right? So for this, you had to speak to your loan officer and try to get it waived. And so it's an act of responsibility that you, I think many people also did not understand the moratorium, and it was not some free lunch that was being given to you. So you have to be able to borrow responsibly. You should be comfortable with the EMI that you were paying. Use the moratorium carefully and by understanding the full implication, and be regular in your payment, because that was the best way that you could make sure that your loan amount was being reduced in the plan which was as originally envisaged. So, and before opting for the moratorium, for whatever reasons, you should also consider repaying the loan by selling off some assets. If you had some insurance policy against which you could borrow, or you had some mutual funds which you could redeem, or some bank fixed deposits, because those were definitely yielding you lesser returns than what you were anyway paying for your loans, right? So very few assets would have given you interest rate far greater than the interest rate that you are paying. Maybe equity would have, maybe equity did, but for you the stress would have been too much. So the faster, and one thing is very clear, the faster you repay, the larger the quantity that you repay, obviously you are going to pay lesser interest, right? So obviously if you continued, in fact if you paid more than what you had to pay, let us say your income did not go down during the moratorium, or your income actually went up, which happened to certain class of people, then obviously you could repay faster. But for this moratorium given by the government was meant just to help you tide over the problem temporarily for any kind of an emergency that you had. Maybe you could have paid it, but for some medical emergency, you had to pay big COVID bills, or any of those reasons. For such people, this came as a relief for a short period, 3-4 months, right? That is what this moratorium was supposed to provide, and people had to understand very clearly that during this moratorium period also there was interest which was being charged, and that had to be borne by you. The government was not waiving the interest. The lending company could not afford to waive the interest because they have an interest cost which they are paying. They're borrowing money and lending. There is no way how they could have said told their lenders that we will not be paying interest. So the moratorium came at a cost, and that cost was also borne by you. So this you have to understand. Many people did not understand, and that's a little sad. Thank you.